It's a story that slides between the mythic past and looming future. The perspectives of oppressor and oppressed, the distinction between revenge and righteousness. Theatre Projects Manitoba is set to open their latest play at the Rachel Brown Theatre in the Exchange District this week. It's called Prophecy, and it's a reframing of Homer's The Iliad from the lens of the women of Troy. Their voices are concentrated in one character played by Prophecy's playwright, Jessy Ardern, who joins us live in the Classic 107 studios. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. First of all, what's it like being this close to opening as the star and the creator of this production? Is it double the nerves, double the excitement?
You know, I'm really nervous, but not for the usual reasons. I work in theater, which means at this stage, normally you're freaked out because something big hasn't been resolved or you never got around to fixing that problem. And we're in such a good state that everyone keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I'm thrilled about the show. I'm so excited. But usually there's a disaster happening right now. And so far, no. So knock on wood and fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But at the same time, if it did, I would kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Keep waiting for the theater disaster.
I mean, we're only just starting this interview, so it could be now.
That is true. I'm going to make sure there's no, loose lights over my head or something.
Exactly. Everything's recording the way it should. We're rolling on all cylinders so far, but we're just getting going. I want to know, Jessy, when did you first encounter the Iliad, and what was that experience like for you?
I think it would have been over a decade ago now. When I was in high school here in Winnipeg, my now best friend said to me, I want to do a fringe show about the myth of Perseus and Medusa. And I went, okay. And not really being familiar with Greek mythology, not knowing much about the Greeks. But that project kicked off kind of now what has become a lifelong love of Greek mythology and those stories, which underpin a lot of our Western culture and our way of storytelling. Even if you aren't familiar with Greek myth or Greek theater, so much of the way we structure our stories and think of our stories actually comes from there.
Yeah.
And it's kicked off a love and an obsession, and I'm still working on it.
What is it about that sort of Greek style of telling stories and the way in which these myths and legends are constructed that still draws you in all these years later? Oh,
there's so much about mythology that I could talk about that interests me. I mean, a big part of it is I find myths simultaneously very large and very small. Like, it's stories on a scale and of a scope that we so often don't play with anymore. This idea of the gods and people and fate and the emotions are so big and the characters are so big and so it's just fun on that level. But at the same time, mythology, and I would say particularly Greek mythology, is so interested in character. And so as you adapt these stories, and as thousands of people have adapted them over the years, there's 1,000 different versions of Achilles. There is 1,000 different versions of Cassandra, because we take our own perspectives and we play with those characters and try to figure out their motivations. So you get to play on this sort of grand operatic scale, but at the same time they feel very human, and you're working also on this very kind of personal psychological scale. And that's true of most myth, I would say, but the Greeks really defined for us the way we look at stories. So I teach playwriting to high school students in Alberta as part of a program through a theater called Workshop West. And the curriculum of that program uses Aristotle's rules of playwriting, because the way we think of structure and the way stories move and what we think of as important elements of storytelling really comes from the Greeks.
Okay, there's so much to unpack with all of that, but you did mention the character that you will be portraying in Prophecy,
right, yeah.
Cassandra. All of these voices, this large scale that you were speaking of, sort of distilled into one voice. What was the moment as you were engaging with the Iliad where you wanted to, or you thought maybe there was an opportunity to shift the focus to Cassandra?
I have to say, the first draft of this play was written almost 10 years ago, and I can't remember if there was a specific spark, but I do remember as I was writing, it occurred to me, Cassandra is a character who's been blessed by the gods. She can see the future, and her curse is that no one ever believes her. But as I was working, I was thinking about the problem of having seen everything is how would you know what's ahead and what's behind? Because a memory is behind you. But if you remember the future, as she says in the play, the future becomes a memory too. And so I became interested in the urgency of this character and what became in Prophecy, this character who knows that there is a war coming, or maybe there was a war coming, and or maybe they're in the middle of a war, but because essentially all of time is now a memory, she's not quite sure what's a memory because it's the past and what's a memory because she's seen it in the future, which lends a sort of urgency to the story because she's not sure if she is forewarning people or if it's already happened and it's too late.
Oh, so I mean, there's a distinction then that has to be made between vision, if we were to put an overarch on both a memory and seeing the future in some regard.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Without giving too much away, because obviously people have to come and see how these visions come to impact Cassandra in person at Prophecy. How do you think that people who know the Iliad are up to date with their Greek mythology, as it were? What do you think that they will see in this production?
Well, I'll say right off the bat, you don't have to be familiar with the Iliad. You don't have to be familiar with the story of Troy to see this show. I've been very careful with that from the beginning, and we had guests come in who didn't know anything, specifically so we could say, was there any confusion? So I'll start it off by saying you do not need to know anything about this mythology coming in. But I think for people who are familiar with these myths and with these characters, I think they'll be interested to just see a different take, particularly on the Trojan women. So Briseis, for instance, is a character who very early in the Trojan War is captured by the Greeks and lives out most of the Trojan War actually in the Greek camp as essentially there's no nice word for it, a prisoner of war, a concubine.
Yeah.
And that story, when the movie Troy came out, she became the love interest of Achilles. She became this romantic figure. And in our version, she's quite young, but also quite resilient. And she has her own very particular way of navigating that situation in a way that speaks to her resilience and her ability to find humor and all these things. So for me, what's always fascinating about myth is the plot stays the same, but the motivations and drives of the characters are painted with a different brush. So I think that's, for me personally, that's always interesting. And I think for people who know maybe a more traditional version of the Iliad, I think they'll be interested to see how the essential plot points haven't changed, but the characters' perspectives have, especially because the Iliad is really focused on Achilles. It's all about the rage of Achilles. And the focus in most storytelling of Troy doesn't shift to the Trojan women until after the war. Whereas here, it's about their experiences from the beginning.
As you speak, I'm struck by what you were saying earlier about how everything is so complicated in the storylines, but also it's so grandiose, operatic, as you say, but also so simple in that there are these sort of archetypes that have resounded across the centuries to the way that we tell stories today. I guess I'm trying to figure out then, does that make your job distilling all of these stories into one voice, into Cassandra, an easy one or a hard one?
Well, Cassandra is the conductor of the story, but she draws up some of the other characters as the story goes on. So I play Cassandra, and then I also play Hecuba, who's the queen of Troy. Briseis, who's this young, in this version, kind of the bastard daughter of the king. Yeah. So she's sort of a half princess. Yeah. And Andromache, who's the wife of Hector, who's kind of the great hero of Troy. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of fun, which is interesting. I always feel a bit guilty when I say I'm having fun playing the women of Troy, because ultimately Troy, goes.
It's not a happy ending.
It's not a happy. Spoiler alert! It's not a happy ending. But I have so much fun playing these women, especially because I hope that some of them are quite funny. Like and they aren't people who sit at home all day rocking in a corner going, "Oh, the terror, the horror." They're intelligent, funny, practical people, and they're intelligent, funny, practical people who really, until quite late in that story, are winning. So I honestly have a blast, and I hope the audience will as well, because it's quite fun actually, and funny for entire chunks until it again, spoiler alert, isn't.
Right, exactly. You're somebody who engages with historical storytelling in a lot of your work as a theater artist, appearing in various Shakespeare productions, for example. What do you bring from your experience performing the classics into something like this, where the focus and the story gets a reframing or a shift?
I mean, I think in like, take Shakespeare, to use your example, it is easy if you don't really go deep into that material to just go, oh, these are characters that are archetypes. These are characters that are stereotypes, and you play a stereotype instead of playing a real person.
Right.
And as anyone who's seen a truly great Shakespeare production will tell you, you have to find how they are actually unique, eccentric human beings. Every human being in the world is eccentric in some way. So a really great Hamlet will look like no other Hamlet, not because they're doing something wild and wacky and weird, but because that actor has really found the individual. And that's something that has really been driven home to me the more I work on Shakespeare is good actors don't really think of them as Shakespeare characters. They just think of them as characters. And in the same way that as I'm portraying these women, as much as they are kind of grand historical figures, that's an empty shape that needs to be filled. You can't just play the container of, I'm the Queen of Troy and I'm kind of grumpy sometimes. She's got to feel like a real person, or it's frankly not that interesting. Yeah,
sure. On the flip side of that coin, what do you maybe take away from doing a work like Prophecy into these more sort of classical performances that you then do in other facets of your theater life? Maybe another way to ask that question would be, what do people who see you perform more classical theater, what do you think they take away from the unique vision that you then bring because you have engaged sort of beyond these archetypes and empty shells?
That's a really interesting question, and to be honest, I'm going to probably come up with a better answer on the drive home. But
I'll wait for it.
But I think they're coming back to this idea of size. Often in theater and particularly in the North American style of acting, we think of honest performances as being quite small. And I think part of that is the influence of film. But if it's really honest, if it's really grounded, you're not doing very much. It's very small and contained. But in fact, the human experience, watch a soccer game, right? Somebody misses a goal and they fall to their knees and they throw their arms up in the air in grand despair.
Yeah.
Or see a wedding and a groom watches his bride walk up the aisle and just starts crying. The human experience is actually full of large emotions expressed largely. And so I know that I find when I watch classical theater and when I experience really good classical theater, what I'm reminded of is these emotionality and the expression of emotionality can be big without being dishonest. And in fact, it's very freeing, right? It feels quite cathartic to go, you're sad, be big and sad. And that is not assuming that the acting is well done. If it doesn't slip into melodrama, which is, that size but played insincerely. If it's not melodrama, if you can find that size and scope, it feels very freeing to watch and to play, because it is true and real. We forget that as people, our emotions are big. We just happen to live in a world where we contain all the time, right? It's not appropriate to scream in public when you're angry. It's not appropriate to laugh and kiss your partner all over the face in public. We tend to contain our emotions, and I'm not opposed to that in real life. But it is once in a while nice in theater or in any kind of art, to say the emotion is big and it can be expressed largely without it being melodramatic or self-indulgent, which of course as an actor is always my balance, right? Is like, can I express those feelings very freely without sliding into, melodrama?
You have the permission, then you give yourself permission for that freedom of expression in that moment.
I absolutely do. And it's part of the reason I really enjoy acting is I get to do that. I get to sort of delve into those feelings and let them go freely without worrying about just, contain it, be polite. So I get to go out on stage and leave it all on the floor, which is fun.
The public also had a chance to engage with these themes and ideas and emotions that are contained within Prophecy ahead of time. We had Sam McLean with Theatre Projects Manitoba come in a few weeks ago and talk about the opportunity that people had to engage with the sounds and some of the visual elements that will be incorporated in Prophecy at an event at the Forks. What is that like to have the public, even before the production has begun, engage with your work that has been a decade in the making, and also to shape the experience that the audience will have during its run? Because this art that the public created will, I understand, also be a part of the experience at the Rachel Brown Theatre. Yeah,
and to be quite honest, I wasn't able to make it on the evening that they did that event, so I don't know yet. I'll be really interested to see, if we have members of the public who were engaging beforehand with some of the soundscape of the show, if that's going to impact their experience. I don't know yet. I do think one of the beautiful things about that event was Theatre Projects decided, rather than coming out and doing a land acknowledgement, which can sometimes feel quite rote, that they would engage an artist. And I sincerely apologize because I cannot remember her name, but they engaged an Indigenous artist to create a response to the show, which I believe is going to be that piece of art, which I have seen and which is quite striking. I can't stop looking at it. That is going to be in the space as the land acknowledgement for the show, is this piece of art that was created in response. I believe that's going to be in the lobby of the Rachel Brown, although I could be wrong.
I think that is correct. Yeah, I think that's correct based on the plans that Sam was laying out.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, if there's kind of any reverberations from that. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah. Such an interesting project, and I hope that many people come and check out Prophecy at the Rachel Brown Theatre, 211 Bannatyne Avenue in the Exchange, officially opening on Thursday, March the 20th, and running until March the 30th. Jessy Ardern, director and star of Prophecy. Thank you.
Writer and star.
Writer.
Sorry.
Yes, nope, you're 100% right. It is still early in the morning, and that is our error that we were talking about before. That's the shoe dropping.
Hey,
I fell on an Achilles sword for you in that instance.
Thank you so much.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being in the studio today.
Thank you.